In Part 5b, we delve into the spot market and foreign exchange. This slide includes a list of topics that we will cover. Transactions that involve immediate or near immediate purchase or sale of foreign currencies occur in the spot market. In reality, cash settlement of these transactions typically occurs in 48 hours or less. There are two ways in which spot rates are quoted, direct and indirect. With a direct quote, the asset is the foreign currency and its price is the domestic currency. For example, from a U.S. perspective, a quote of $0.00931 per yen is a direct quote. It tells us the price of 1 yen in dollars. To put it another way, it tells us that 1 yen is worth about a penny. With an indirect quote, the asset is the domestic currency and its price is the foreign currency. For example, from a U.S. perspective, a quote of 107.36 yen per dollar is an indirect quote. It tells us the price of $1 in yen. To put it another way, it tells us that $1 is worth about 107 yen. By the way, if we were looking at these same examples from a Japanese perspective, the direct quote example would actually be the indirect quote, and the indirect quote example would actually be the direct quote. This slide includes a selection of spot rate quotes from Exhibit 5.4 on page 121 of your text. Note that these are based on late New York trading on June 5, 2013. If we assume a U.S. perspective, then the exchange rates in the in U.S. dollars column are direct quotes, and those in the per U.S. dollar column are indirect quotes. For example, consider the euro quotes on the top right of the page. For now, ignore the 1, 3, and 6 months forward rates and just consider the first row. On June 5, 2013, apparently 1 euro cost about $1.31. That's a direct quote. The indirect quote tells us that on that same date, $1 cost about 0.76 euros. Of course, from a Eurozone perspective, the direct and indirect quotes would be the opposite of those from the U.S. perspective. Again, considering the spot rate quotes from a U.S. perspective, note that the indirect quote can easily be derived from the direct quote because 1 over the direct quote equals the indirect quote. In other words, the direct quote is the reciprocal of the indirect quote, and vice versa. I've illustrated this using the spot quotes for the British pound that are included just beneath. So here's the British pound, and notice the direct and indirect quotes for that. And note that the direct quote is simply the reciprocal of the indirect quote. And there's the math. Let me introduce a bit more terminology. FX traders refer to quotes in American terms and quotes in European terms. For American term quotes, the asset or denominator is a foreign currency and the price or numerator is always the dollar. Thus, a quote in American terms is equivalent to a direct quote from the U.S. perspective. In Exhibit 5.4, the American term quotes are in the column labeled in U.S. dollars, and I've included the American terms quotes for the euro and the pound on this slide. Let's take a moment to practice interpreting changes in the rates. First, suppose that today the American term quote for the euro is $1.30 per euro. However, in a month, we observe that the rate is $1.40. What does this imply about the values of the dollar and the euro? Well, the new spot rate of $1.40 per euro means that the dollar has decreased in value, or we would say that the dollar has depreciated relative to the pound. This is because it now takes more dollars to buy a euro. At the same time, the euro has increased in value because 1 euro now buys more dollars. So the euro has appreciated relative to the dollar. For a second example, suppose that today the American term quote for the pound is $1.87 per pound. However, in 1 month, the spot rate has changed to $1.77 per pound. See if you can figure out what effect this change will have on the values of the dollar and the pound, and fill in the blanks. For European term quotes, the asset or denominator is always the dollar and the price or numerator is a foreign currency. Thus, a quote in European terms is equivalent to an indirect quote from the U.S. perspective. In Exhibit 5.4, the European terms quotes are in the column labeled per U.S. dollar, and I've included the European terms quotes for the euro and the pound here. Again, let's think about how to interpret changes in European terms spot rates. Suppose that today the European term quote for the dollar is 0.7679 euros. However, in a month, we observe that the rate is 0.7 euros. What does this imply about the values of the dollar and the euro? Clearly the dollar has decreased in value. It's depreciated relative to the euro. That's because $1 now buys fewer euros. At the same time, the euro has increased in value. It's appreciated relative to the dollar. It takes fewer euros now to buy a dollar. Again, see if you can work out the changes in the second example, which uses European term quotes for the dollar in terms of the pound. So fill in those blanks. Most currencies are quoted in European terms. However, by tradition, traders typically use American term quotes to quote FX rates for some currencies, including the pound and the euro. The important thing to remember is that exchange rates can be quoted in two ways, so you need to be careful in interpreting them and you need to know what you're looking at. Note that the American term spot rate is the reciprocal of the European term spot rate, as illustrated for the euro at the top of this slide. I think it helps to figure out which currency is the asset and which one is the price. The asset will be the denominator and the price will be the numerator in the rate. Finally, it's also helpful to include notation that clarifies the ratio you are considering, and I've given a couple of examples of types of notation at the bottom of this slide. So far, I've considered a single exchange rate between two currencies, but in reality, FX traders quote bid prices and ask prices. As with any asset, the bid price is the price that a dealer is willing to pay you for something, and the ask price is the price that a dealer wants you to pay for something. So from a dealer's perspective, the bid price is the price at which she will buy, and the ask price is the price at which she will sell. Of course, the dealer wants to profit by buying low and selling high. Thus, the bid price is always less than the ask price. The bid-ask spread is the difference between the two prices. Note that currency dealers don't typically charge a commission for transactions. Instead, they rely on the bid-ask spread to cover their cost and yield a profit. Suppose a dealer quotes the bid-ask prices for the euro, the bid and ask prices for the euro that are given on this slide. Note that, as expected, the bid price is less than the ask price, but also note that that difference is small. In fact, bid-ask spreads typically are small, but this is offset by the fact that currency trading is usually in large volumes. Commonly, a single trade would have a value equivalent to 10 million US dollars. Dealers refer to this as a $10 trade. Spreads tend to be smaller for frequently traded currencies like the dollar, euro, and yen, and they tend to be a bit larger for less frequently traded currencies. Also, the spread tends to be larger for retail customers who trade in smaller volumes than interbank customers. At the bottom of this slide, I've shown how to calculate the percent spread, which equals 0.0153% in this case, using the bid and ask prices at the top. Bid and ask prices can be quoted in either American terms or European terms, and I've provided an example on this slide. A dealer quoting the price of the pound in dollars, that is quoting American terms, would simply state this quote as 0.0005. Other traders are familiar with the market enough to know the big figure, which is 1.54 in this case. And so there's your big and small figures. Let's take a closer look at the quotes from the previous slide. Notice that the American term bid price is equal to the reciprocal of the European term ask price. I've shown the equation for this in the bottom left corner of the slide. Now let's consider a trade of 1,000 pounds. One way to think about this is that the dealer is willing to buy 1,000 pounds from the customer for $1,540. So that's the top schematic there, where the dealer is buying pounds and selling dollars, or paying for them with dollars. Note that I've used the American term bid price here because the asset is the pound and the dealer is buying it. But if the dealer is buying pounds, then he must be selling dollars. Therefore, these quotes also imply that the dealer is willing to sell 1,000 to the customer for 649 pounds and 40 pence. That's the lower little diagram there. Here I've used the European term ask price because the asset is the dollar and the dealer is selling it. Thus, we see the reasoning behind the fact that the American term bid is the reciprocal of the European term ask. And it's important that you remember this when working currency conversion problems. On the next few slides, let's practice currency conversion using bid-ask spreads. As our first example, consider a New York speculator who wants to take a $10,000 position in the pound. After his trade, what will his position be? That is, how many pounds will he have? Suppose a dealer provides the quotes provided here. Note that the quotes for the pound in the first row are in American terms, and the second row are in European terms. The speculator wants to sell dollars to buy pounds, which means the dealer will be buying dollars and selling pounds. From the dealer's perspective, the dollar is the asset that he will be buying, and we can see that the dealer is willing to pay 0.6491 pounds for the dollar. Again, from the dealer's perspective, the pound is the asset that he is selling, and the dealer would be willing to sell a pound for $1.5405. Now, on the lower left side of the slide, I provided the calculations using the European term bid price, and on the lower right, you'll find the calculations using the American term ask price. It should not surprise you that both approaches yield the same answer because the two quotes are simply the reciprocals of each other. Thus, we find that after a trade, the speculator has 6,491 pounds. By the way, I worked through this example thinking about the quotes from the dealer's perspective. Remember that the dealer always gets the best price in the trade, regardless of if he's buying or selling. In other words, when you look at quotes, remember that the dealer will always get the lower price when buying and the higher price when selling. You could also arrive at this same answer by working through it from the customer's perspective, but in that case, remember the customer always gets the worst price when buying or selling. I like to personally approach these problems by consistently taking the dealer's perspective, and I suggest you try doing it that way too. For me, always thinking about a problem from the dealer's perspective makes it easier to determine the correct rate to use. However, some people consistently approach problems from the customer's perspective, and that would certainly work too. Okay, I think I'm about to run out of time for my narration here, so I've got two more examples for you, and I'll make another little recording for those. So let me pause here, and then we can pick this up in the next narration. Okay, thanks.